Hey guys, Logan here with EV Sportline. Today, I'm here with our shop truck, our Rivian R1T. I'm going to show you how to install your very own RMaxx Aero covers with an RMaxx running board. To get started, I've already put our vehicle in off-road mode to give us extra clearance while we work underneath the vehicle. Let's get into it. Jumping into the tools, I have laid out here the tools for both the running board and the Aero cover install. Now, you wouldn't be necessarily installing these Aero covers without the running board, so I'll go through that install as well. Looking at what's in front of me, I have some 1/2-inch drive, ratchets, breaker bar, torque wrench. I chose to work in 1/2-inch drive, but you can work in 3/8. We have a T27, a 4 and a 5mm Allen key. We have a 1/4-inch socket for our T20 bit, a 10mm, an 11mm or 7/16 for our TP55 bit, our 13mm. We've got a wrench also just in case of 13mm, 14mm or 9/16, a wrench of a 14mm or 9/16 as well, and then a 17mm socket. Optional tools are going to be a tape measure, a jack puck, and some Loctite. Additionally, we offer paper instructions on the website if that's more your speed. All right, let's get into the parts. Looking at the parts that come with the kit, we already have our driver's side prepped, so I thought it would be better if I pull out all the passenger side hardware and panels to show you how to prepare them. Looking at what we have on this table, we have 4 panels. Passenger side A, B, C, and D. For the R1T, we're gonna have 4 panels. R1S, you'll have 3 panels. Looking over at our brackets, you can see our front bracket, our middle bracket, and our rear bracket. For the T, this is gonna be side dependent, so passenger and driver side specific. And then you'll see here we have our button head hardware, our clip nuts, and our adapter for using our Gen 2. There's also gonna be an included plastic cup that will fit within panel A. All right, we're gonna start by prepping our panels. Basically what I mean by that is we're gonna be installing our clip nuts into the rectangular and hexagonal tabs on our panels. And this is only going to be for panel A, B, and C. So for installing our clip nuts, essentially we're going to want to install the threads so that they're on the concave side, so pointing in towards the vehicle. What you can do if these are a little bit tight, you can use a screwdriver and kind of pry them apart, or you could just slide them on. They'll clip in just like that. The nice snap, panel A is ready. We'll do the same for panel B and C. And we're gonna wanna do the same for the mounting brackets that I've already done right here. So for our front bracket, you'll see that we have our holes with the markings. Our threads are gonna go towards the hole with the markings. Here in the middle, again, you have the holes with the markings. Your threads are gonna go in the holes towards the holes of the marking. In the rear, we have the wide base. Our threads are going to be going towards the wide base. Now with our panels and our brackets prepped, we can move over to the car. Now I mentioned earlier that I already have this in off-road mode to give us access below. What I haven't mentioned is, we previously had running boards installed on this vehicle. I have since removed the running boards. But since we had running boards, we didn't have our plastic panels on. So we're gonna wanna remove the plastic panels using the 10mm or T27 and our T20 bit. To remove this front panel, you're gonna need to use your T20 bit to remove these 2 fasteners, and then also your 10mm socket or T27 bit or driver to remove the fasteners further on down the panel. Now we've seen with Gen 2s, there's sometimes a 10mm, sometimes there's a T27. For Gen 1s, it's gonna be always a 10mm bolt. There will also be a bolt holding on the rear panel, and then these panels are gonna be clipping into a trim rail up here. We have other videos that show removing these panels if you need that for reference. One thing we're also gonna do while we're under here is gonna remove this T20 fastener as well. And note, we're gonna be using these 3 locations for mounting our Aero panels, so we're gonna wanna keep this hardware. All right, so I'm underneath our Gen 1 right now. When mounting up these Rivian running board brackets, we're gonna be using these TP55 bolts to fasten our brackets down. So for the Gen 1, we're gonna use bracket number 3, so that's the first bracket after this step down. So starting from the front, bolt location 1, 2, and 3. Bolt location number 4, 5, we're gonna mount to bolt 5, 6, 7, we're gonna mount to bolt 7, bolt 8, bolt 9, we're gonna mount to bolt 9, and bolt 10. Note that this is gonna be the factory lift location, right between 9 and 10. So for the Gen 2, they actually ended up putting 2 extra bolts in the frame right here. so that kind of throws off our numbering. But this front bolt is going to be still the location of our front bracket for our running board, and that's bolt number 3 from the front, first one after the step down. So 1, 2, and 3. We're going to use bolt number 3 for our Gen 2, 4, 5, and 6, 7, we're going to use bolt number 7, 8, 9, we're going to mount to bolt 9, 10, 11, we're going to mount to bolt number 11, and 12. And note, again, this is going to be the factory lift point right there for our R1T. All right, so starting at bolt number 3, again, the first one after the step down, we're going to remove this TP55 with our TP55 bit. I'm going to use a breaker bar. Rivian uses a lot of Loctite on these, so just go slow, take your time to break them loose. I'm going to use a little bit of Loctite before I put our bracket in. Switching over to my ratchet to get this thing snugged up. It can remain loose as we're going to use the board to ensure that it doesn't rotate when we torque these TP55s to the spec. Moving down to the next one. Now these brackets are installed, but still relatively loose. We're gonna get our running board. Something I wanted to note is that we already have our tread plate attached, so you can use your 4mm Allen key and 10mm socket to get these tightened up to 8 foot-pounds. All right, like stated previously, now these TP55s and brackets are relatively loose. Got some play. The reason that we're leaving them loose is that we can mount up this board so we could torque them to spec so they don't rotate when we're torquing them to 80 foot-pounds. Now the way that this is going to be oriented is we're going to have the bracket is going to be the leading piece and the running board tab is going to be after, so it's going to be behind the bracket. We're going to use our carriage bolt and nut. Carriage bolt's going to come in from the front into the square of the running board bracket through our tab and then fastened with our nut. Like so. And this is going to be the 14mm nut. So the way that I do this install is I like to grab one of these, get it prepped. I aim for this top hole, rotate this up, get that through, and then I pretty much can let my knees down once I get that nut on. And what we're looking to do right here is to get one of these carriage bolts in each of these, with one of these brackets having 2. And then, like I said, we're gonna put 2 of them in one of the bracket locations, and I choose to do it in the middle. Now I'm going to grab my ratchet, my 14mm socket, my torque wrench, and my TP55 bit. These don't need to be torqued to a specific specification, they just need to be tight. All right. We're going to grab our torque wrench and set it to 80 foot-pounds and torque these TP55s to specification. Now that those are torqued, we can remove the running board and get ready for our Aero panel install. Now we're moving to our last bolt. I'm gonna make sure that I can support this as it's the only piece holding this running board up. All right, so looking underneath our vehicle now, we're gonna mount our Aero panel brackets to our Rivian. These are gonna go between the Rivian and the Aero panels. For the Gen 1 R1T, R1S, we're gonna be using these front 2 17mm headed bolts. They look just like that. We're not gonna need to use any extra hardware. We're gonna reuse these, use Loctite to put them back in. So for Gen 2, we're gonna use this rear bolt hole, which is gonna be the leading bolt on the tray, and a threaded hole that's in the Gen 2 frame. So we'll need our spacer and our supplied hardware to bolt into the frame. We'll flash some photos up to show what that would look like between the 2 generations. But for now, with the Gen 1, I'm gonna take these 2 bolts off. All right, I'm gonna apply some Loctite to these bolts, mount it up into the position. So we're gonna have the clip nut is gonna be leading, going towards the front of the vehicle. Get these further up into the frame. So before torquing these 17mm headed bolts down, we're gonna make sure that the center of the front jack plug location to the center of the leading clip nut on the front bracket is approximately 11.5 inches. Once confirmed, we can torque these things down to spec, about 45 foot-pounds. All right, let's move to the next one. Moving to our middle bracket placement, we're gonna grab our middle bracket, and this one has a lot of different configurations. For all the Gen 1s, essentially you're gonna try to find the hole location with a little triangle, and that's gonna point you to the mounting locations for Gen 1s. So for here, we're gonna find the hole with the triangle and the hole with the triangle. We've already had this mounted, and so you can see some witness marks on it. And they're gonna be mounting around bracket location number 2. I'm gonna grab our Loctite before putting these back in. Arrow goes forward. Now, if you were mounting this on a Gen 2 vehicle, you would find the bolts in the same relative locations, and you'd mount under the tab with the 2 semicircles. We're gonna show a photo of that up here in the video. And then before cranking these bolts down to spec, what we're gonna do is we're gonna measure the distance from this front leading clip nut to the front leading clip nut of the first bracket and make sure that we are in the right spot. So the distance should be approximately 30.375. We can torque this down to spec at 45 foot-pounds. All right, now we're mounting this final bracket. It's gonna be underneath this, for the R1T, underneath this tray right here, this plastic rear tray, behind the battery tray. So there's a 13mm hex head that we're gonna be taking off and mounting under. And this is also right next to bracket number 404, the rearmost bracket. Drop this one down, provide a little bit more Loctite on it, and grab our bracket. So we're gonna point the tail towards the rear of the vehicle. Note that there's 2 hole locations. The hole location on the larger edge of the tab, that's gonna be for our Gen 2, because on the Gen 2, this location is further out on this plastic tray, and this plastic tray actually is extended. On the Gen 1s, however, we're gonna use the hole location closest to the bend on the bracket. And then for the Gen 1s and Gen 2s actually, you can measure the center of this leading clip nut with the center of the leading clip nut on the middle bracket. Should be about 34 inches. Once you confirm that, you can tighten this one up. The torque spec is about 25 foot-pounds. There we go. And now we're ready for the Aero panels. So we're gonna get to installing panel A right here. So again, like I said, we're gonna be using the 3 mounting locations of those T20 fasteners, and then one of our button head bolts right here. And then we have these fasteners over here, these clip nuts that are gonna allow panel B to mount to panel A. One thing to note too is there's this trim rail all across the Rivian, and this was used to mount the factory rocker covers, the plastic rocker covers. We're gonna use that and clip onto that with this little C channel right here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get it onto the C channel in the back and slide it forward. You can either tuck this metal tab under the plastics or over the plastics. I like to go under. And then gonna make sure we have our metal tab into the lung plate. I'm gonna grab my T20s that we initially pulled out and get these started. Now, if you're finding that you can't get your T20s to grab onto the little clip nuts that are on this plastic, you'll be able to reach in and pull this plastic down. And as far as mounting this aero panel forward and backwards, I find it helpful to use a jack puck because we're using this factory lift location as our 0 point, and everything's built off of that factory jack puck location. So I'm gonna make sure that we're relatively centered, left to right, forward and back, and then I could tighten down the T20s a little bit. Something to note that also these jack pucks are magnetic, but if you do accidentally knock it with your arm, they will fall out. So watch your noggin on that one. And these don't need to be torqued down too tight, just snug. And next, we'll grab one button head bolt and our Allen key, and we'll thread in to the front bracket. Just a couple threads. We want to keep this panel loose, and we'll tighten it at the end once we have all the panels together and the running boards up. Let's move on to panel B. So now we're going to grab panel B for the driver's side. For installing, we're going to clip to this rail and make sure that these brackets go right between the pre-cut slots. So there we go, we have it up attached to the lip, and grab our button head bolts. And I'm gonna start with the bolts that attach to panel A and get those in just a couple threads. And now I'm gonna work with the hole that mounts to the front bracket. And then also the middle bracket. And again, the bolts are just loose. All right, so now looking at panel C, driver, we're gonna be mounting to, again, the tabs that are on panel B, the rear of the middle bracket, and the front position of the rear bracket. We're gonna hook onto the lip. Make sure that we're between, in our slots, in the brackets, come in through the slots. Again, I'll start with the button heads that mount panel to panel. Just loose, and then the front and the rear. All right, moving on to panel D. And now working with our panel D for our driver's side, what we're gonna do is we're gonna wanna get these tabs to insert into the tab locations of the OEM trim. And also, we're gonna still ensure we get our seat channel, like so. Grab that channel, grab that trim. And we can start with our panel C to D mounting bolts, and then our rear bracket bolt. Now we can move and get our running board mounted up with our carriage bolts. If you notice that your aero panel bracket is either too far forward or too far back relative to the aero panel itself, feel free to drop the panel before you get to this next step and adjust it accordingly, forward or back, whatever you need. It's a lot easier to do at this step than it is later, and there's some adjustability designed within those brackets. All right, now with our aero panels up but loose, we can put our running board up into our brackets. It's a little bit harder to hang it this time, so you kind of have to go a little bit more parallel. There we go. Got one of them in. And there's two. And again, I'm getting all these just in hand tight. As you're putting these bolts in and the nuts on, you might find that these carriage bolts are up and into the aero panel. What you might need to do is just move the running board up and down. If the running board is loose and hanging down like this with very few nuts up here and bolts up here, then it might twist the carriage bolt up to the aero panel. Feel free to move it around to get it centered. Now I'm going to adjust my running board to be fully out, like so. And then I'm going to use my 14mm socket and wrench to tighten these bolts up. I'm going to push these a little bit up so that I can get this plane level. I think if the running board's leaning down, you'll be able to see it right here where this tab is a little bit up. If the running board is too high, then you'll see it where this tab is coming down. So we want to match the planes with the running board bracket and the running board tab. We're going to torque these lower bolts down, 40 foot-pounds. And then getting to these top bolts, you might not be able to get a socket on them. So that's where the open-ended wrench comes in. Grab our 14 millimeter, push our panel up. I'm gonna match the torque between the two. All right, so now our running board is fully torqued down. We just need to tighten the remaining bolts on the Aero panel and provide some finishing touches. All right, so at panel A, we can put our cap in for our jack puck, and we can tighten down this first bolt. Between panel B and panel A, we're gonna wanna make sure there's a small little gap. Doesn't need to be too large. Tighten the panels together. These panels are pretty malleable. Tighten down the button head bolt that goes to the front bracket. These two are for the front bracket, and this is for panel to panel. Moving down to the bottom half of B, front of C. Gonna tighten the rear bolt on panel B. So this is gonna be the front bolt of the middle Aero panel bracket. Starting with panel C, we're gonna wanna set equivalent gap that we had up in panel A to B. And tighten the bolt for the rear location of the middle bracket. All right, now moving to the rear of panel C, start of panel D. We're gonna tighten the rear mounting bolt for panel C to the rear bracket. Confirm that the gap is equivalent between now all of the panels. We can tighten down the bolts that go from panel D to panel C. We can tighten down the last bolt that mounts panel D to the rear bracket. All right, just want to hop back to the rear panel one more time. So this panel was designed so that you can access your factory jack puck location. All you have to do is take your 5mm Allen key and remove these 3 bolts. And just like that, you have access to your factory lift location. Bolts can be installed in the same way they were taken out. And with that, we have our RMaxx running board and RMaxx Aero panel installed on our driver's side R1T. You'll do the same steps on the passenger side to complete the install. Thanks so much for watching. Leave a comment below if you have any questions, and we'll catch you on the next one.